The night my wife told me I'd wasted my entire life, I was standing in our kitchen in a cardigan she'd given me 2 Christmases ago. I remember that detail because I remember thinking, right in that moment, that I should probably give it back. She didn't yell. That was the thing about her, she never yelled. She just looked at me across the kitchen island with those flat, tired eyes and said, "You know what your problem is, Ned? You've never once in 63 years made a decision that mattered." I didn't argue. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with her was like trying to explain color to someone who'd decided they were done seeing. My father had died 3 weeks before that conversation. 79 years old, a mechanic's hands, a quiet man who'd spent 40 years running a small salvage operation out in Millhaven County. My brother got the house, the 3-bedroom colonial on Archer Road where we'd both grown up, with the oak tree in the backyard and the porch swing my mother had picked out in 1974. I got the yard, not the house, the yard. More specifically, I got the 2.5 acres behind the house that my father had separated from the main property deed sometime in the 1980s. It had an old equipment shed on it, maybe 800 square feet, rusted corrugated roof, concrete floor, 2 windows so dirty they'd stopped letting in light years ago. My brother called it the back lot. He said it like that, dismissively, with a little exhale, the way you'd describe something you'd already mentally thrown away. We'd stood outside the attorney's office in the November cold when he told me. He had his coat on, a nice charcoal wool coat, and he was already checking his phone. "Look," he said, "if you want to sell it, we can probably get something for the land value. I know a guy in commercial development. Just let me know." I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. When I told my wife that evening, she set down her fork, just set it down carefully on the edge of her plate and looked at me. "The shed," she said, "and the 2 acres. She picked her fork back up. "He always did prefer you," she said, meaning my brother. "Your father, I mean." I didn't respond to that either. My father had loved us both. He just knew us both. The Millhaven property was 40 minutes from our house. I drove out there on a Saturday morning in December, mostly just to see what I'd inherited. The road turned to gravel about a quarter mile before the turnoff, and there was a rusted gate that had been left half open so long it had grown into the ground at an angle. I pushed through it and walked across the frozen grass to the shed. The door took some persuading. The hinges had rusted and the wood had swollen with moisture, and I had to put my shoulder into it 3 times before it gave. Inside smelled like motor oil and cold concrete, and something faintly chemical underneath. Not unpleasant, just old. There wasn't much to look at. A workbench along one wall with a pegboard above it, most of the hooks empty. A rusted floor jack in one corner. 2 metal shelving units, mostly bare, except for a row of old coffee cans my father had used to sort bolts and screws. Along the back wall, there was a gray metal filing cabinet, 4 drawers, the kind you see in old government offices. The top drawer had a combination lock on it. I stood there for a long time, long enough that I could see my breath. I tried the bottom 3 drawers first. They were unlocked, mostly empty, some old invoices from the salvage business, receipts going back 20 years, a few mechanical manuals with his handwriting in the margins. My father was a careful man. He wrote notes in everything. The top drawer I took home with me. The whole cabinet, actually. I got a dolly from my car and wrestled it out to the truck, which took longer than I'd like to admit, and drove it back to the house. My wife saw me carrying it in through the garage and stood in the doorway to the kitchen with her arms crossed. "What is that?" "His filing cabinet." "From the shed. And you're bringing it here, why?" "Because it was his," I said, and she went back inside. The combination lock on the top drawer was a standard 3-digit. I tried the obvious things first, my father's birthday, my mother's birthday, the year they married. None of them worked. I sat with it for 2 evenings before I remembered something. My father had a habit, when he was teaching us something mechanical, of repeating numbers. He used to say the best codes were the ones hiding in plain sight. He'd had a padlock on his toolbox my whole childhood, 917, the address of the shop where he'd apprenticed as a young man. I tried the address of the Millhaven property, the first 3 digits of the parcel number printed on the tax document I'd gotten from the attorney. The drawer opened. Inside were 3 folders. The first held the original deed to the 2.5 acres, separated from the main property in 1987. The second held what looked like a utility agreement from the county, dated 1999, with some kind of routing notation I didn't immediately understand. The third folder was thicker. On the tab, in my father's handwriting, it said Federal. "Read carefully." I read it that night at the kitchen table while my wife watched television in the other room. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at. My father hadn't been a complicated man, but he'd been precise, and the documents in that folder were organized in the order you'd want to read them. The original agreement first, then the amendments, then the correspondence. What the folder contained, in summary, was this. In 2003, a federal telecommunications contractor had approached my father about running a fiber optic conduit across his 2.5 acres in Millhaven. Not through it, under it. The conduit ran approximately 340 feet across the back quarter of the lot, well below the frost line. My father had negotiated an easement agreement. The initial payment had been a one-time sum for access rights, but there was a secondary clause, a lease arrangement for what the document called continued subsurface infrastructure maintenance access, renewable every 5 years, at a rate that adjusted with a federal index. The lease had renewed automatically in 2008, and in 2013, and in 2018, and in 2023. The current rate per the most recent renewal documentation was listed at $2,400 per month. I sat with that number for a long time. The television murmured from the other room. I could hear my wife laughing at something. $2,400 every month. Deposited, according to the account routing information stapled to the inside of the folder, into an account at a regional bank I didn't recognize, under the name of the Millhaven Property Trust my father had established. A trust. I hadn't known about the I called my father's attorney the next morning, a different one that had handled the estate, an older man named Pettigrew, who'd done my father's business work for 30 years. He wasn't surprised to hear from me. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. "Your father asked me to let things settle before I reached out. He wanted you to find it yourself." "Why?" There was a pause. "He said you'd understand it better that way, that if someone handed it to you, you'd second-guess it. But if you found it yourself, you'd know what to do with it." I didn't say anything to that. "The trust transfers to you directly," Pettigrew said. "The federal agreement runs with the land. As long as the infrastructure is in use, and it's active, the payments continue. The next renewal is 2028. Based on the index adjustments, you'd be looking at somewhere between $2,800 and $3,200 a month by then." I asked him if my brother knew. "The trust was separate from the estate," Pettigrew said. "The estate conveyed the land to you per the will. The trust documents were filed separately. Your brother received a full accounting of the estate assets. The trust was not an estate asset." I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 45 minutes. I didn't go back inside. My brother called me 4 days later. I hadn't said anything to my wife yet. I was still sorting out what I wanted to do, how I wanted to think about it. He called on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual because my brother rarely called without a reason. "So listen," he said. "I've been talking to that development contact I mentioned. He's actually interested in the Millhaven parcel, not just the shed, the whole 2 acres. The area's getting some commercial attention. Apparently there's a distribution facility going in nearby. He said he could probably get you somewhere in the $140–150 range, $140,000, for the 2 acres. "I'd want to take a look at the offer before anything," I said. Sure. But honestly, Ned, what are you going to do with a dirt lot and a broken shed? Take the money. You and your wife could do something nice." I told him I'd think about it. What I was thinking about was this: my brother had a gift. He always had. He could walk into any situation and immediately identify what was worth taking. He'd done it his whole life: scholarships, opportunities, jobs, that house on Archer Road. He had an eye for value. The problem was, he only looked at the surface of things. He'd looked at the Millhaven lot and seen a dirt lot. He'd looked at my father's filing cabinet and seen old paperwork. He'd looked at me probably and seen a man with no angles. He wasn't wrong about me. I don't have angles. I'm not clever in the way people mean when they call someone clever. I'm not quick. I'm not charming. What I am, what I've always been, is thorough. My father knew that. It was the only thing he'd ever said to me directly about it. One afternoon when I was about 16, when I was helping him inventory the salvage yard and complaining that it was taking too long, he'd put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Slow costs you time, son. Careless costs you everything." I told my brother I wasn't going to sell. He went quiet for a moment. "Then, you sure about that? This kind of offer doesn't usually come back around." "I'm sure," I said. He sighed. Not meanly, just the way you sigh when you've decided someone else is making a mistake and you've done your part. "All right, it's your call." After I hung up, my wife came in from the other room. She'd heard enough of my side to get the shape of it. "Was that your brother?" "Yes, he had a buyer for the property. He said he did." She looked at me. "And you said no?" I said no. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read the folder 2 weeks before, though she didn't know that. She folded her hands. When she spoke, her voice was careful and quiet, the way it gets when she's decided to be honest rather than kind. "Ned, I'm going to say this once, and I'm saying it because I think you need to hear it. You have spent your entire adult life being cautious, waiting, looking at things from 17 different angles. And what has it gotten us? We're in our 60s. We have a modest retirement, a house that needs a new roof, And now you've inherited a piece of dirt in Millhaven County that you're refusing to sell on principle. Your brother is handing you a solution, and you're telling him no because, why? Because you want to be right? I looked at her. I don't think you understand what I've found, I said. There's nothing to find, Ned. It's a shed. I went to the filing cabinet. I brought the federal folder to the table and set it in front of her and watched her read. She read slowly. She went back to the beginning once. I made coffee and set a cup beside her, and she didn't look up. When she finally did look up, her expression was different. Not softer, my wife doesn't soften exactly, but recalibrated, like she'd just received new data and was updating her model. This is active, she said. I called Pettigrew. He confirmed it, and your brother doesn't know. Not about the trust. He knows I own the land. She looked at the documents again, then at me. Something shifted in her face that I hadn't seen in a long time, a kind of attention, a focus that meant she was taking something seriously. What are you going to do? She said. Keep it, I said. Let the payments come in. Probably put the land into better shape. There are some access road improvements that would help with the federal contractor maintenance visits. Maybe look at what the shed footprint can support if the land use changes. She was quiet. Your brother's going to be upset. Probably. He's going to say you should have told him. He had the same access to the estate documents I had, I said. He chose not to look. My wife reached for her coffee. She held the mug in both hands the way she does when she's thinking. She didn't say anything else for a few minutes. Then, you knew. When he called with the offer, you already knew what was in the folder, yes. And you let him make his pitch anyway, yes. She looked at me for a long time. Not the flat, tired look from before. Something different. Something I recognized from early in our marriage, before the years had accumulated, and the disappointments had calcified into something permanent. Why didn't you tell me, she said, before this, when you first found it? That was the harder question. I thought about it honestly. Because, I said, the last time I found something I thought was valuable, you didn't think it was worth much. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to understand it completely before I brought it to you. She set the mug down. What did you find? Before. That I dismissed the mineral rights on the Johnston Road property. In 2009, she was quiet. That turned out to be nothing, she said. It turned out to be nothing because we didn't pursue it, I said. We didn't pursue it because you said it wasn't worth the attorney's fees. I let you make that call. I wasn't saying it to wound her. I want to be clear about that. I was saying it because it was true, and because we're finally having a conversation we should have had 15 years ago. She looked at the folder, then at me. I'm sorry, she said. Those two words from her were not small. My wife is not a woman who apologizes easily. I won't pretend the years of dismissal just dissolved in that moment. They didn't. Trust is not a light switch. But it was a beginning. My brother found out in February when the estate attorney sent a standard accounting summary that referenced the trust transfer. He called me. He was not gracious about it initially. I'll be honest about that. He was hurt, I think, more than angry. He'd spent his life being the one who saw opportunities, and here was evidence that he'd missed one. Sitting inside a filing cabinet on a property he'd mentally written off. We talked for a long time that night, longer than we'd talked in years. I told him about Pettigrew, about the federal documents, about finding the combination. I told him what our father had said, that he'd wanted me to find it myself. He was quiet for a while after that. He knew you'd read it, my brother said finally. Yes, he knew I wouldn't bother. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. That's not a criticism, my brother said. I don't know what that is. It's him knowing his sons, I said. There's not a dramatic resolution to tell you about. My brother and I are still brothers. We see each other at holidays. There's a layer of something between us now. Not resentment, exactly, more like a renegotiation. We're both learning what that looks like. The payments come in on the 15th of every month, deposited into the trust account that now has my name on it. I drive out to Millhaven every few weeks, not for any practical reason, but because I like to stand on that land. I've cleared some of the brush around the shed and fixed the door hinges. I had the windows replaced so they let light in again. I've been thinking about what my father saw when he stood there, what he saw that was worth holding on to for 40 years without telling anyone. I think I know now. He saw something that looked like nothing, and he knew that the most important things usually do. My wife comes with me sometimes. She walks the property line while I work on the shed, and afterward we sit in the truck with the heat running and drink coffee from a thermos. She doesn't say much, neither do I. But it's a different kind of quiet than we had before. Less like two people who've run out of things to say, and more like two people who finally found something worth being quiet about together. Last month she asked me what the acreage looked like in spring when the field grass comes in. I told her I'd never seen it. We'd always come in winter, she said. Let's come back in April. I said we would. That's enough at 63. More than enough. My father understood that, I think. that the value of a thing isn't always in what you can get for it, but in what it asks you to become in the holding of it. He left me a piece of ground that everyone else saw as worthless. What he actually left me was the chance to prove, quietly and without an audience, that I'd been paying attention all along. I think he knew I would.